truly speaking, it is very difficult to talk about truth, because many of the philosophers, rather metaphysicians, believe that truth is the reality, and reality being abstract, it is not possible for the sense organs to comprehend the reality. Then what is truth? Many of the philosophers in the world and also the scientists are trying to understand what is truth, and they are developing the various theories of truth. There are different approaches as regards what truth could be. There are three main approaches that we find in the history of philosophy. One of the approach you can say the approach of the realists, that is, you can say an empiricist approach. The second approach to the theory of truth is the metaphysical approach, and the third approach is called as a practical or workable approach towards truth. Let us in a nutshell try to understand what are these various theories of truth, what do they maintain, and what are their limitations. Let us first consider the first theory called as the theory of correspondence. The theory of correspondence has been maintained by mostly the scientists and also many philosophers. According to this theory, a judgment or a proposition is true only and only if it corresponds with a fact. Means a statement and a fact must be in correspondence with each other, then alone it is true. It is our daily practice to speak about truth in this particular way. When I say that something is sweet, how can the taste of the sweet be possible? The taste is very simple, that you taste it by your tongue and you will come to know whether it is sweet or not. If you say that something is sweet or this fruit is sweet, how can you taste? The truth of the statement is as simple as tasting the fruit and observing whether the taste is sweet or not. Likewise, in our day to day language, we make the usage of the correspondence theory. If I say that the chalk in my hand is white and circular, what is the taste? Just look at the chalk and my hand, that there is a chalk in my hand, it is white in color and it is cylindrical in form. It is true. And suppose it is not white, it is yellow or red, and suppose it is not cylindrical, then the statement is false. Then you will find that according to realists, the test of truth is very simple. In botany, in physics, in biology, in geometry, in geography or in astronomy, you will find that this test of truth is very important. For example, when Newton said that all bodies are attracted towards the earth, it is due to the gravitation force. You can simply test it by throwing a substance or object like a ball upwards, and you will find that it falls on the ground. Why does it fall on the ground? It is because of the attraction between the two objects, and the attraction between the two objects, that force is called as the gravitational force. So, the test of truth is very simple according to realists. What is most important in this theory is the use of our perception. We perceive things. How do we perceive things? We perceive things with our different sense organs. We see, we touch, we taste, we hear or listen, and like that we have five sense organs, and we go on collecting 5 different sense data. When a particular statement is true, it must correspond with the sense data. That means it rests or relies on the sense data. Whether it is true or not depends upon the correspondence between the statement that is made and the sense data that is collected. So, this is one of the very simple test of truth which we always employ in our day to day life. But what is most important is to see its limitations. Philosophy is actually metaphysics, in the sense that it is in search of reality. There are so many questions in philosophy about which you cannot hope to have any sense data. For example, you want to know about God. How can you see God? There is no form of the God. There is no any quality to God. There is no any sensation that you can derive from God. So, it is absolutely impossible to understand the truth about God by such an empirical method or perception. Perception has its thus limitations. For example, the ideas in ethics such as what is good, you cannot examine the idea of good by touching it or by testing it or by looking at it. The idea of good is altogether a different kind of entity, a metaphysical entity. That means the test called as the correspondence theory of truth has its important limitation. A great realm of knowledge is beyond our sense organs, and you cannot imply the theory of correspondence of truth to the metaphysical world. There are again so many limitations of the empirical approach, this very empirical approach. So, you will find that our sense organs depend upon the health of a person. If the health of the person is good, it is sound, then alone the senses work accurately. But again the problem of accuracy is there, how far our sense organs are accurate. Many times just by touching something, we cannot understand the degree of the heat or the degree of coolness. For that we require some other instrument which will help us to know the exact degree of the heat. You will find that there is no accuracy all the time, and sometimes when sense organs are immature or go weak due to old age or disease, you will find that they are not able to work, and when they fail to work, how can they give you the perfect sense data having a correspondence with your judgment. So, you will find that there are some more limitations also. There are cases of non-observation, that you do not observe every time, everything, every factor. For example, while reading a proof, you do omit. It is possible that you do omit a letter or a word or a comma or a question mark or something, and you just go on reading as if you are reading the whole thing. It is a case of non-observation. There is also the case called as malobservation. Malobservation means looking or watching or sensing something which is not the case. There are also again the cases to be called as illusions or hallucinations. Do our dreams exist? But while watching dreams, we feel that they exist, that I am running and that I am sitting in an aeroplane and traveling all over the seas and all that, that is a dream. But when dreams come to an end, you cannot say that it was true. So, all the time you cannot rely on your sense organs to give you the accurate and the final knowledge. Also, it must be noted that while watching anything, our interests are at work, our motives are at work, our purposes are there behind watching anything. So, what happens is that our purposes, motives, interests shape our experience, and when we shape our experience, we see accordingly and we fail to see what a thing is as it is. So, you will find there are great limitations of the correspondence theory. So, correspondence theory cannot be accepted as the final theory of the truth. One more important thing is there. When asked how far is our sense data reliable, Many times that you will find that you do not see with clarity. When there is a certain kind of light or shadows, you do not see the colors and forms as really they are, and your sense data may deceive you, or under some physical or psychological conditions you fail to understand the exact sense datum. So, you will find that there is another difficulty, how far our senses are all the time correct. They are not all the time correct. Sometimes they are correct, mostly correct or probably correct, but not that they are guaranteedly correct. So, you will find that so many questions can be raised as regards the possibility of being correct in case of sense organs. You will find that the correspondence theory therefore remains incomplete. And the most important thing about the limitation of the correspondence theory is that there are so many things that they are to be discovered by philosophy. Philosophy is mostly interested in understanding what is God, what is soul, what is the immortality of soul. How is all this knowledge possible by sense organs? You cannot hope to perceive them. And most importantly, the knowledge in logic and mathematics is not possibly testable by sense organs. In logic you will find that there is an argumentation, the laws of reasoning, and the laws of reasoning is not a matter of having any correspondence with reality. It is above the reality, it is beyond the reality. Even in mathematics there are numbers and there are different kinds of relations. So, you will find that the correspondence theory has its great limitations as to examine the truth in logic, the truth in mathematics and the truth in metaphysics. So, in short we can say that even though in day to day language the correspondence theory has its importance, philosophically while searching for the ultimate truth it does not help us. So, that is the limitation of the correspondence theory. So, we have to look for another theory about truth, and another theory about truth is called as metaphysical theory, or rather you may say metaphysical approach towards truth. This theory, the metaphysical theory, has been generally accepted by most of the philosophers, and particularly the spiritualists believe in this particular theory. What do they do? What is this theory called as? This theory is called as the theory of coherence. What is knowledge when asked? A philosopher would say knowledge is a set of arguments, one set of argument and another set of argument and a third set of argument and several sets of arguments, and all those sets of arguments must cohere with each other, must be consistent with each other. If one of the set fails to cohere or to be consistent, then you will find that it fails. So, consistency is the test of truth, coherence is the test of truth. Coherence theory or consistency theory is very much accepted by the idealists like Plato, Hegel, Bozanki, because they are in pursuit of knowledge, and the pursuit of knowledge is the pursuit of the knowledge of ultimate reality. The knowledge of ultimate reality is possible only by reasoning. What is important in the theory of coherence or consistency is the reasoning. In logic and in mathematics, the role of reasoning is very important. The coherence theory or the consistency theory has its applications mainly in logic, mathematics and metaphysics. One must understand the importance of logical thinking, that is reasoning. To arrive at a conclusion, one has to infer logically and go by the rules of inference, giving one premise and the other premise and the second and the third premise and so on, whatever the number of premises be. All those premises must be consistent, coherent with each other, and from these coherent premises you arrive at particular conclusion. Now, that is one argument. Now, another argument you are going to make, and that argument again must be coherent with the first argument and so on, and the third argument again must be coherent or consistent with the previous arguments and so on. Thus, knowledge formulates a whole system of knowledge in which you have to maintain consistency or coherence. For example, if I say that AB is a line which is parallel to CD and CD is a line which is parallel to EF, then you infer logically that AB is parallel to EF. That is how the logical consistency is there in saying that AB is parallel to EF. Suppose, for example, in logic you are concluding by the law such as if P implies Q and Q implies R, then obviously consistently you have to say that P implies R. Because in P implies Q and Q implies R, there is a logical consistency, and between PQ implies R and R implies S, there is a logical consistency. So, you will find that logical consistency is very much important in the metaphysical knowledge. Now, you will find we have also to notice what are the limitations of the coherence theory. Can the coherence theory be applied to empirical knowledge? Because we also want to know the truth of the empirical knowledge, and the truth of the empirical knowledge cannot be attained just by logical inquiry or by having a coherent set of arguments. There you have to apply the correspondence theory of truth. So, the correspondence theory of truth cannot be discarded so immediately. There must be some consideration of the correspondence theory also. There is a knowledge which you cannot hope to have from the coherence theory, because coherence theory believes in inference, but the rules of inference, what they give us is the validity, and validity of an argument is one thing and truth of argument is another thing. An argument can be valid, but cannot necessarily be truth. So, truth and validity are two different things. It must be noticed that philosophers are wanting to know the reality, the truth of reality, and not only the logical validity. Logical validity can be a formal validity. It could be an empty something, a form empty with content. Truth pertains to the content, to the subject matter, and logical validity contains only to form. That is the greatest limitation of the theory of coherence. So, coherence theory cannot be said to be very sound theory. There is one most important thing to be noted about the limitation of coherence theory is that it says that a logical argument must be consistent with its previous argument, and when asked what is the test of the truth of the previous argument, you have to say that the previous argument must be consistent with its previous argument, and so on and so on. Thus, you go on ad infinite regress, and you cannot yield the proper result, what is to be called as the coherent truth. So, you will find that all philosophers are not satisfied with the theory of coherence as the sound and only theory. There is a third theory of truth, and the third theory of truth is called as pragmatic theory of truth. And this pragmatic theory of truth, one can say, is the practical theory of truth. You will note, you should have to note that it is John Dewey and William James of America, that means these American thinkers have developed this theory. At the basis of all American thinking, culture, civilization, you will find that the pragmatism is there. What is the pragmatic theory or the practical theory of truth? The pragmatic or the practical theory of truth is that it says that workability is the test of truth. In day-to-day language, what do? When something works, we say that it is true, and when something does not work or fails, we say that it is failure. That means truth and paucity depends upon the workability. In other terms, one can say that the successfulness of an argument or a proposition or a judgment, it depends upon its workability. In other words, they call it as the result or fruit oriented, the result oriented theory. This result oriented theory has a great applause, a great recognition, and it is very popular in American culture and in American way of life. But all the time you cannot accept the workability theory of truth, because the workability theory of truth cannot be applied to the metaphysical entities. The metaphysical entities are not available to this particular kind of approach. That is one of the limit of this particular theory. The pragmatic theory has been maintained by William James. Let me quote William James for this. William James says, true ideas are those that we can assimilate, corroborate and verify. False ideas are those that we cannot. That means, what is important according to this theory is assimilation or corroborate. That is the important and very significant about the pragmatic theory. The pragmatic theory is opposed to any kind of authoritarianism. That means, it does not accept any statement from any kind of authority. Authority may say anything, but unless what is said by the authority comes really true or can be experienced, it cannot be called as true. Whether it could be the testimony of the church or a particular text which is taken granted, which is granted by every religion, it cannot be accepted as true just because it is from some authority. Another important thing is that it opposes to intellectualism or rationalism. Truth is not a matter of just an intellectual understanding. Truth is not just a matter of logical reasoning. Truth is something that is very, very practical. Unless practically we are satisfied by a particular judgment giving a certain kind of result, we cannot accept it simply as true. One more important point regarding the previous theory about which I was speaking, the theory of coherence, I have a special thing to bring to your notice. Suppose there are two sets of arguments, a set of argument by a theist saying that God exists, and there is another set of argument by an atheist saying that God does not exist. Now, look at the set by a theist who is saying or trying to prove that God exists with consistency. A theist would say that God is good. A theist would say that God is eternal. A theist would say that God brings equality. A theist would say that God is just, and therefore God exists, because all these are the properties of a perfect being, and God is a perfect being, and therefore God exists. Now look at the second argument, which also is according to the theory of coherence. An atheist is saying that God does not exist, because he would say that there is evil in the world, universe, because there is inequality in the world, because there is injustice in the world, and when there is evil, when there is injustice, when there is inequality in the world, how can one say that God exists? Therefore, God does not exist. So, you will find that both the arguments are consistent, harmonious, and yet are opposite and giving different kinds of truth. So, how can the coherence theory be accepted? So, you will find with all these theories, the theory of correspondence, the theory of coherence, and the theory of pragmatism, there are limitations. It means that it is a great challenge for all the philosophers and the scientists to go further and investigate into the nature of reality and the ways of experiencing and reasoning, and to give rise to new theories of truths.